Okay, now I'm sure you'll have heard our next guest on the Where is George Gibney podcast, and now she has put her story and her experiences down in print. It's this brilliant book here. The book is called Above Water, a Survivor's Story. I am talking about Trish Kearney. Trish, it's brilliant to have you on the show. You're very welcome.
Thanks a million. Lovely to be here.
So it's, anyone who reads the book will be very struck by the fact that talking about this was a challenge. And even when Mark Horgan pitched up at your house and was ready to hit record, even then, all these years on, for obvious reasons, it was not straightforward or without a certain hesitancy to talk about such personal stuff. And now here you are after this book and you're doing interviews to beat the band. So how has it been?
It's actually been okay. Probably in a way a lot better than I thought it would be. We all think that we might make a bit of an idiot of ourselves when we speak publicly, irrespective of the topic. So that was always going to be a challenge, but that's actually been okay. And I think the big challenge for me really came many years ago. When probably there when Johnny Watson did the follow up 25-year follow up in the Times. I think that was a big challenge to actually, you know, decide to just talk about this again after 25 years. And not that I haven't been chatting away here, but like this was within a public forum where my family could read it, my friends might read it. And, that was the first time I put my name in the paper. And that was probably harder than speaking aloud
Right.
because even though I only just said it like very casually, yeah, Johnny, write my name, inside there was huge alarm bells going, do you really want to write your name? Are you serious? Are you sure? And kind of it's been a steady uh, climb since then that was actually not as difficult as I thought it might be. But equally, like every step had its own challenges, like meeting Mark and deciding to do a podcast. That was actually enormous because I didn't know Mark Horgan or second captains at all. And so I suppose I was quite cynical about going public with them. So that was a big challenge. And then writing the book was probably of all of it, that was me back in control of my own story. I wasn't leaving it up to somebody else to do. And so from that point of view, it was probably a little bit easier, even though, going on the Late Late and Miriam O'Callaghan and all the different ones, they were all a challenge, to be honest. Even this, everything's a challenge still.
Yeah.
It doesn't come easy. I'm actually, despite all of this being out in the public, I'm actually a very private type individual. I like my own family, my own company, my own people. So I definitely was not reared for celebrity,
Yes.
but I've managed. It's fine.
Good. I'm glad to hear that because I was conscious of these are not easy things for you to talk about for sure. And it must be a bit surreal then when you're on the Late Late Show and it's like, okay, Trish, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, you're about to go on. I mean, there must be a party that says, well, I'm legging it that way. Goodbye, everyone.
Yeah, it was. I mean, I was jokingly saying to friends and family, and like so many people, I'd say hundreds of people texted me before going on, and way more texted and messaged afterwards. But like, I was just my answer to a lot of them was actually, who'll be watching? It was my own way of sort of trying to say, lads, relax. It's me and Ryan are just having a chat.
Mm.
So I suppose I did diminish it that way, but when it was over and I suppose I did go on the Late Late with a bit of an agenda in the sense that I did want to put out a more positive um, slant on things, rather than, the very desperate narrative that often comes around abuse. And I am a very happy person and I am, of somebody whose life has evolved and I've reached a very good place with a lot of hard work in that. And I appreciate that not everyone does,
Mm.
but I did want to reflect my own place in my life. And that's not always easy to get across. And I was very pleased that Ryan took the time to listen to my story, and everybody subsequently has been just so supportive of understanding that where I am in my life, and I equally am very understanding that I stand in a place that isn't where a lot of people end up.
Mm.
And you have to be, it's very hard to marry the two, and be mindful of both sides of the story because it's not a competition. None of us want to be the best. Everyone just needs to try and get through it the best they can. So I suppose that was wonderful to be able to have that opportunity. I mean, my goodness, how many people write a book and they get on the Late Late with it. So I
Mm.
had to I had to sort of kind of come to terms with the fact that while it was all very daunting, and that it was all coming from a very good place,
Yes.
rather than, a bad place, even though it came from somewhere bad way back.
It sure did. You do say at one stage in the book of your life now, as the years have passed, the darkness I once lived in has receded, and for the most part, I live in a happier, brighter world.
Yeah, and I think that's it. And like in any day, in anybody's life, there's shadows and there's darkness. And I just, at this moment in time, none of us can even talk about tomorrow. Nobody knows how life will change in a day. And that's why I do live in my day. And so in any given day, I can be very clear, it's a good day, and today is a good day.
Yes. I thought it was just an amazing book, and what jumped out and what I hadn't expected is that a couple of days on from reading it, and then today again, I sat down and made some notes out again and thought about what to ask you is, there are a lot of villains in that book for sure, and they linger in the memory, and the horror of it lingers in the memory. But geez, your family have stayed with me as well. Like your parents are incredible people, and your husband Eamon is a hero, and it really got across to me that for you, Trish Kearney, to be defined by this would be so wrong, because the book is about this, and yet the architecture of your whole life is what kind of, it's such a more complete life than that. And I can see why there might be a worry going public or talking about it, because it can dominate, and yet I presume you want people to know as well. It struck me as kind of a complicated balance to strike. To what extent should this have real estate over who I am and what I'm about?
Yeah, because like it would be very wrong to say, oh yeah, I've reached the stage of my life, and I'm so over that.
Yes.
It's as I've said before, it's a scar I wear very proudly. It was a hideous, ugly scar for a very long time, and it's a scar now that is a part of my life, and I'm very, not only am I happy wearing it, I'm very proud of it. Like anyone who's come through anything or achieved anything in life, you value the journey that you've been on and where you've come to. But equally, like, you can imagine that for me, when people go, oh God, I'd hate to buy that book, I don't want to be knowing anything about abuse. And there's so much in my book that is not reflecting abuse. It's the story of my parents, my lovely dad, my mom, the resilience, like in anybody's life, losing a parent to motor neuron disease is just crippling. And yet, that's barely even featuring in my life publicly, and yet privately, that's a huge story in my life.
Yes.
And living with my dad with motor neuron disease was just such a difficult time, and it just was the same time as Gibney. So I suppose it is an extraordinary story in that sense. But I think everybody who hears about this as a book, I suppose, naturally focuses in on the fact that, oh, child abuse, oh, I don't want that. And to be fair, a lot of books do have a lot of detail within them. And I personally, find that quite discomforting. And I didn't have detail within my book, but I do try to capture the essence of the control and the kind of lack of power you have, and that. But yeah, it is a story of very many parts. And look, none of us can be defined by our past, because we all came through different things different ways, and some things that should be a minor part of your past may be a huge deal that you can't get over, and other things that you shouldn't be able to get over, we do. We're very complicated individuals.
Yes. At 13, Trish, you describe yourself in the book as lively, outgoing, confident, amongst your peers, something of a leader. And there's something so sad about your sixth year school report, which refers to you as a quiet, shy individual who appears to struggle to mix with fellow students. 1980, 13 years of age, that's what you describe in the book as the year I stopped laughing. And there is something so sad about those two bookends, isn't there? It's the beginning of the toll all this takes, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think they completely speak of the two bookends of that period in my life. It was a phenomenally difficult time, a very, very lonely time, desperately lonely when I look back on it now. But you know, the book is above water. You know, what you see on the up above the water is very different from what you see underneath. And all through those 6, 7 years, I was paddling like crazy to stay above water and just keep on going and get through it. And you know, I can see that on top of all of that, I probably should have put resilient in my 13-year-old life, but I didn't know it at that stage. I had huge resilience, which probably was showing within my competitiveness, you know, that drive that was within me. Definitely, you know, that DNA, whatever it was, did, you know, obviously had a factor in getting me through, but it was a very, very difficult few years.
One of the chapters is called Captive in Plain Sight, which is a brilliant name for the situation, isn't it? And what's so striking as you read page after page is the dual life, as in, on the one hand, there's this horror and it's indescribable and feels inescapable, right next to humdrum daily life, going to school, coexisting, everybody oblivious. It's hard when I'm outside it looking in to even fathom how you functioned, how you went out the door to school and to swimming, and how you didn't have a complete breakdown. I don't know at this remove how you reflect on that aspect.
Yeah, I think one of my brothers put it very well when he said, you know, when they heard first that they said, like, what? How did we miss this?
Yeah.
You know, because their whole lives have been changed in the sense that looking back, they're going, that wasn't the life that we saw. And that's pretty hard for a family to come to terms with. But I suppose whatever way it worked for me, I got through my days by completely whitewashing it, you know, forgetting. And I can still hear myself say these things today, you know, like I won't think about that now. And that's how I lived it. And for whatever reason, it actually worked extremely well for me.
Yeah.
Because even when, you know, I did eventually begin to remember, it didn't flood back. You know, it came back slow enough. It didn't overwhelm me. Of course, you know, I mean, overwhelm me in the sense that I had a huge breakdown or anything. Yeah, I managed to cope with it as it came back to me. But I think that did have a major effect. The way I coped worked for me. Which is, you know, other people, it's a very different story for everybody. Everybody copes in different ways. Like I performed extraordinarily well in the swimming pool. I know. And all of this going on. And sometimes, you know, I detail one, not detail, but I do remark on one occasion that, you know, I was, you know, horribly raped by Gibney at lunchtime and went on to perform magnificently later on in the afternoon. Yeah. So obviously my forgetting was off the scale in an ability to just focus on something.
Yeah. See, I like to just say, you know, I'm not going to think about that, and to be able to do it when it's something of this nature, as you said, it's extraordinary. And if I jump around a little bit, what you've just said there reminded me of that period in the early 90s after Gary O'Toole's letters arrived and you're contemplating going to the guards, and you go and see a counsellor and say to the counsellor, well, I don't want to remember what happened. And the counsellor suggests, bring some photos along of your childhood next session and we'll spread them out on the table. And counsellor says, what strikes you about all those photos? And you say, nothing. Why? Well, they're just photos of me, my life, to help me remember. And counsellor points out, you're outside the ages of 13 and 19 in these photos. And it's just extraordinary. You didn't see it, that on some level you're protecting yourself. So all of this is, you know, this architecture is swirling around.
I found that fascinating. And not only that, but within that menagerie of 50 photos or 60 photos, whatever it was, I actually had 2 photos in particular. One was the very last international I went on as a member of the other club, not of Otter Club, not Trojan.
Yes.
It was my very last link with back then. And the next one was my first photograph in Ireland, because I met my husband, I met Eamon when we were on holidays, but the next one is my first photograph ever taken with Eamon in Ireland. And they're both in that, you know, that's the mind.
You don't need to be Freud, Trish.
Should ask for money back that day.
I know. Yeah, but I guess it explains both consciously and subconsciously how you had to build various mechanisms. And I took those photos
from Dublin to Cork, you know, as part of my new life, my family home, my marriage, and obviously at some level left all the others behind.
Yeah. I guess it was it's self-preservation. It's so you could survive, because
Yeah,
how could you go to school and have those images in your head? How could
yeah,
you?
yeah,
And not scream. What comes across and what you capture so brilliantly is the power he had.
yeah,
Like we're talking, this man was a dictator. This guy owned Trojan and set up Trojan. He was a bully. He was a control freak. He could manipulate like nobody's business. He had the aura of a respectable life. I mean, it was a master plan.
yeah. Oh, yeah. He was wrapped up in the sparkliest Christmas wrapping paper ever, best toy ever. You open it up, everyone sees something wonderful, but the person who's left with the toy realizes, oh my Lord, this is awful. And
Mm,
the thing that it was that I became so ensnared so quickly that and it's something people really struggle to get their heads around is why did you not tell? Why did this? It never occurred to me. This became my life. And I think it was Roisin Ingalls put it in that it had never really occurred to me, or I'd never processed it before, is that she said that, everything he did, what he made it so mundane and so ordinary. So, like it was all cloaked in ordinary everyday life. It wasn't like you were in a dungeon. It was just so ordinary everyday life. Pick you up from school, babysitting, everything was normal,
mm.
but it was not. It was anything but normal. And I think that actually was a very significant feature in how he behaved, because as you said, it was in plain sight, and in plain sight, it was what everyone else was doing. Other people were being brought babysitting, other people were getting lifts from people.
Mm.
It was all normal, but underneath the surface, it wasn't.
Yeah, and when you describe it in the book as inescapable and relentless, and that's what comes across as well, because there's not even like I wanted to ask you, it doesn't seem like there's any great pattern to it, as in, so it happens at the pool, it can happen when you're babysitting for him, which is another just bizarre, strand, that you're babysitting for this man. And even like you could be walking to school and his car shows up. This is the definition of torture, that it's coming and you don't know when it's coming.
Or even when I changed school and I went to did my seventh year, and there's those little windows on the doors, and I'd be in the classroom, and it was a mixed classroom, and knowing that you'd literally be watching the teacher and watching the door, because he had no business to be in the school, like he
Yeah.
was part of the sports complex, but he would find your classroom in that big school, and he would look in the window. It was just it was dreadful. It was just very, very tough.
Yeah, and like there was a cruelty and a sadistic quality to his behavior outside of the horrific things he was doing on the abuse front. As in, you were on a foreign holiday at one stage when you were maybe 18 or 19, and this psychopath sends flowers to you, and it's a card saying, "Don't enjoy your holiday too much. I miss you."
Hmm.
And all
Yeah.
your friends are saying, "Oh my God, who are the flowers from? Who's this?
Yes.
Mysterious admirer. What's going on here?" And like, even on this holiday where you're trying to escape for a bloody week or two, he goes to all that trouble.
Yeah. And I hadn't told him I was going on that holiday, and I hadn't told him. Well, he found out then, but I hadn't told him my address or anything, like, because I arranged it all in a week, and was gone. And then this arrives, and it arrived, like, I can't remember, was it within the first week or just after? So I'd had this mad week of 13-year-old lively, crazy Trish was back with a bang, because I actually never got rid of her.
Yes.
I held on to her, which I think was another saving thing that for me. I spent my time that I could look in the mirror and see real me, and that's why I never became the isolated, timid person, even though that was my persona. And then getting these flowers was like, oh, such a slap. It was it
Yes.
was it was similar to, if he caught me smiling or laughing somewhere, that kind of, it would wipe the smile off my face so quickly. And this was the same. I had these flowers. I had met Eamon on that holiday. I was beginning to break free of my
Yes.
shackles and realize that, get an insight into, that rage. He can feck off. And next minute, the flowers arrive and you're back in victim mode. And I was really, even though it was in Cyprus, honest to God, for quite a few days, I thought that he was the next thing going to appear. I
Yeah.
couldn't see why he wouldn't, you know.
Can you remember trying to make sense of it in your teenage years, as in trying to work out what's going on with this person? What, like,
No,
no.
no, I just, no more than your parents, like no more than my mum was there every day when I came home from school and made my lunch and made my dinner and my family came in the door. It was just like that. It was as ordinary as that. It would never occur to me to say, why is mum making that dinner today? Why is
Yes.
that? It's not occurring to me.
This
To
is
ask
just the
that
way life
question.
is.
Yeah, never ever, as I say, even as I got older, 15, maybe 16, you know, realizing that this isn't in everybody's life, because I did realize that it wasn't in everyone's life, but also never thinking I could escape. Like I couldn't see, how would I escape this? How would I get away from it?
Mm.
And so I thought that this was going to be my life, even when I was in my 50s and 60s. That's how desperately lost I was in it all.
The staggering thing is the way we've outlined his behavior. I mean, it's like a full-time job, and yet there are so many others that he's abusing as well. Is the absolutely extraordinary thing. Like, it must have felt like his life was revolving around you in the worst possible way, and it turns out you're one of so many.
Yeah, that was a huge shock. That was just, I mean, that was devastating, because I think I had, obviously buried it. Then Gary's letter came, and Gary's letter, within that letter, you got that you had to face up to, this was abuse. It was abuse of me. And then just as you're kind of, that's washing over you, you're getting this massive wave of, oh my God, there's more people.
Yeah.
I couldn't get my head around it. And, as I'm thinking it, I'm thinking of, were they my friends? I didn't even know at that stage that there was people dating back 20 years before me, or 10, was it 10, 15 years before me? And then
Yeah.
there was after me. And, wherever, as the days went on and I began to realize what that meant, I was desperately sad initially for the possible people. And to be fair, they came to my mind almost immediately who they were. But the awful thing that really made my blood run cold was that, oh my God, did he move on to somebody else? And I really, that sent a desperate panic into me. And it was that, more than my own upset, that drove the whole idea of the guards, that, like, and honestly, I don't know, did I even process that he had moved on to other people, because it was so far beyond the horrors in my imagination that it didn't stop with me, and that in a sense that somebody else would have unnecessarily gone through it.
Yes. That period in your early 20s where you're married and a young mother, and Gary's letter arrives like a bombshell into your life, and there's the counselor, and will I go to the guards and won't I? It's hellish, really, the way you describe it, to be honest. When you're going to the counselor and you're saying, I don't want to remember, is it completely extinguished? Has your mind worked to such an extraordinary extent that you can't remember any of it? Or what role is it in your head at that stage?
I suppose what had happened at that stage was, my eldest daughter had been born, and and I was now, that was 2 years had passed since Gary's letter, a year and a half, and the court case was looking very likely, and a year and a half since I'd gone to the guards. And so I kind of was beginning to prepare myself that I would have to go in court. And so I went to the counselor to try and find a door to get the memory out in a way that would help me, because it was beginning to flood out in terms of just flashbacks that were out of my control. And so my GP had sort of suggested maybe a counselor would help you to access it. And so that's why I went, but I didn't go really of my own volition. I went because the court case was coming up, and I didn't want to stand there and go, I don't know.
Yeah.
So I went for that purpose, but I happened to be pregnant with my second child at the time. And I was in a very protective mode, very kind of, pregnancy is like that, kind of, I was very mothering and motherly, and trying to mix it all together with memories. It was just all too much.
Yes.
So when she would say something like, right, well, maybe, and she wouldn't say, what do you remember? She was very good at trying to piece, small things. So she might say, well, do you remember the first time he did whatever? And I'd be there, no. And I would literally be like that. And then she would say, okay, well, how about such? No. So it wasn't even the case I didn't remember. I didn't even try with the poor woman. Like, I was just, no, thank you.
Yeah.
And she would say another time, like, well, maybe when you go home, could you write it? Even write a line? No, I couldn't do that either. So I was a very difficult client of hers. And I could hear it in myself, like, and as I say in the book, did remind me of, when you're sent to the principal's office, and you're being kind of balchy. Did you do that? No, no. I was very defensive. So, she was very good at just saying, look, just not your time,
You weren't ready to remember it.
No.
Because I think that's one of my stronger memories from reading the book, is that period in your early 20s when the court case is brewing, when Gary's letter is there, when you're trying to get to grips with being a mother, and you're newly married, and the way you describe your home life and your experience of that, you out of nowhere, Gibney's face flashback, nightmares, avoiding going to bed, at one stage compulsively washing your hands, feeling dirty. I mean, it read as breakdown. It read as just, it was so intense. Actually, it was the suffering was just so intense in that period. I felt like at any moment your eyes were probably teary. It just seemed horrendous.
Yeah, and yet my friends wouldn't have even known about it. Eamon would have known about it, but even he, like, he said, it kind of came back to him when he read it. I suppose he's a bit like myself. He's very good at the old forgetting.
Yeah.
And he said, but he did remark, that wow, was so much at the time. It was huge. And yet anyone who has small children will know, like anything, you're just so busy getting on with your life. So that's what we were doing.
Yes.
It was in a way, it mirrored my teenage years, because I was continuing to get on and live a normal life while it was anything but normal inside me. And I think it's good for people to know too, that when they see Trish Kearney now, that I had to go through an awful lot to be well. And the point, I suppose, is that it didn't last forever, and it was possible, and it did, better days did come.
Yes.
But they were, that was a very hard, and you had to have a huge amount of kind of strength, because when you're not sleeping, or just when you're living frightened. I was very frightened. I was just frightened of having a nightmare. They weren't real, they were just nightmares, but they were so frightening that I couldn't even go up to bed. I couldn't turn off lights. I wanted the TV on because I was frightened. It was as simple as that. And it was obviously the fear I had when I was a child, but I didn't. When I was a child, I wasn't as frightened as when I was in my 20s.
I know that's what was kind of surprising about the book, because I kind of braced myself to read it, and then, as you said, it wasn't as I guess as detailed as other books choose to be. And and there's no right or wrong. I don't want, if somebody.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And people make their choice. Yeah. But I hadn't anticipated your early 20s to be the most horrific read, in a way, that was my God. But isn't that the awful thing, that like the trauma is only just beginning in some ways?
Yeah, and you see, when you look back at people, or when you speak to people who are survivors of abuse, you will often see that period of time in their life that was a huge turmoil. And it's often 10, 20, maybe 30 years after the abuse. They survived the abuse. They lived their life. They were, in some ways, that's why people couldn't believe them, because they just seemed to be so ordinary and normal. And, but you were running out to the car, and, why were you running to the car when that person was doing that to you? And they have to come to terms with all that themselves later on.
Yeah.
And that process is not easy. It is a difficult process, but
yeah, no, I could picture you over the sink washing your hands for the 20th time, and a child crying, and just, oh my God. People, I think, are pretty au fait at this stage through the podcast, or reading about, Gary's letter, and then you go to the guards, and there's the court case, and ultimately there is a very unsatisfactory outcome there, and that's a horrific blow for you. And then Johnny Waterson makes the call and does extraordinary work. And that morning, the 4th of December 1994, where your husband Damon goes out to buy the Tribune and brings it back, and the stress of that and what's going to be in here, and the horror. My God, I was my leg was tapping reading it at the time. That was an extraordinary morning.
Yeah, that was probably the biggest nightmare ever, because in my wildest nightmare, I couldn't have imagined, the scale of the story within the paper, and the graphic nature of an understanding of what others had gone through. Because really, up to then, I knew nothing of anyone else's story. I didn't know these other people that I've now become, almost friendly with, one in particular, Ber Carley. I would be, since the podcast, we're great pals, and that's lovely. But, reading her story back then, and we were all anonymous at the time within that Sunday Tribune, and just, it was sickening, because I don't know what they thought of my story, but like, I was looking at their stories going, oh my God, that's even worse. Oh, that's terrible. Oh, how could he do that? Like, she was only 9, I was 13, there's such a difference, even though it's only, they're still children. Anyone who's had children knows, but 9, and like, then, I just found the whole thing very, very difficult. And then within it was this quote from his new Scottish club, where he was busy coaching away, and they were saying, yeah, we know the allegations, but like, it would never happen here, and he's a great fella. And it was sickening, and it was a desperate slap as well, because we thought that this, by doing this, we thought this was our only way of publicizing the story of George Gibney, because we couldn't do it in court. And then here he was carrying on coaching, and we had done this. Well, I personally had done it with a view to letting people know this is the George Gibney that you all think is a great fella, and that you're all letting coach your kids.
Yeah.
And then they're going, yeah, so he's great over here. He's a lovely man. And that was very, very difficult. But having said that, like, if we hadn't done that, if Johnny and Peter Murtagh hadn't done that, his name would still never be known. Like, we would never, ever, we would have been silenced forever. Only that Johnny took up the story. My mind is always blown by that, because how would we have healed? I mean, how would I personally, I can only speak maybe for myself, but how could I have healed, if I was, if I was doing all that in my 20s, but with no outlet, nobody to believe me, nobody to say, and to know that if I went to Dublin, he'd be down the pool still. It would be dreadful.
I'd never thought of that. Yeah. Would you have been able to heal with that?
I don't know. Or equally, people who maybe never find peace, that the person continues to be, maybe for whatever reason they don't come forward, and the person continues to be living down the road, and they see them walking by, and they know that this is what that person did to me. And they don't come forward. It must be a very difficult, thing to live with. But I mean, as you said, there were evil people in my story, but merciful, I have been so blessed with amazing, like, Gary O'Toole is one man in a bazillion. Johnny, I mean, unbelievable. And to this day, I've actually never met him. Never.
You're joking.
Yeah, never ever met him. We've never met.
Well, when this pandemic is over, you need to put that right.
He lives down the road at home, like. But those people that'll fight their corner, and that'll mind you and look out for you. And my own Eamon, and and even Mark, and the second captain's team, and all of that, like, people that just have championed our cause and looked after us, and journalists within the media and everything, So I mean, met fierce bad luck with Gibney, but the men in my life that I've met in my life have been my brothers, like everyone. My dad.
Yeah.
I've been very lucky. I wouldn't even call, and I've said that before, I wouldn't even class Gibney as a man amongst the men. Like, he's, as I said before, he's like a reptile really compared to them.
Yeah. Eamon comes across wonderfully the way you describe him. And you say at one stage that you've never discussed details. From the moment I told him what had happened, by then a wife and young mother, he's been steadfast in his support, always taking his lead from me, never pushing for information or asking too much, but quietly prevailing without judgment or display of hurt or anger, my rock. He comes across to me as an unbelievably patient man and a man of real kind of quiet confidence, and very assured and extraordinary.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Eamon has so many qualities that really clicked for me, and he has tremendous emotional intelligence as well. But I think the biggest thing about Eamon was he never ever felt it was his job to heal me, and or to make me better, or even to make me feel better. He was just around, so that if I came, or if he went to put his arms around me and my arms didn't return, it wasn't a slight on his towards him. He had enough of his own kind of confidence, self-confidence, that he was able to cope with that. And the great thing about Eamon is, like, I'm a great talker, like, but Eamon isn't. Eamon's a listener. And we matched very well that way. And he's just like, I couldn't really describe him. If you meet him, I think people within minutes get him. It's just yeah, I see now.
Good person.
He's yeah, and people would sometimes said, "Oh, I used to think you were nice, but like you're horrible." I mean, he is, and I think I was very lucky, that, like, literally from the day I met him, I kind of, I had an idea what I had met.
Yeah.
And I think I was lucky, because there's a host of wonderful friends, male friends in my life, and I don't think any of them would have lasted the course with me, because it was a difficult road. And I think he was just the man for it. He was everything that I probably needed at the different times, and hugely supportive, but just never, kind of, as I say, overly concerned that I must feel better.
Yes. Number 108 is such a big part of this story. It's your house number in Dublin. It's a happy place. Your father, your mother, I mean, you mentioned earlier, your father sadly passed away too soon, before the Gibney fallout. And I mean, you see, the book starts off with towards the end of your mother's life, and you've such a close relationship, and it's a time of goodbye. And I guess you're kind of, as a reader, you're building up to the moment where you have to break your mother's heart and tell her what's happened, and it comes as a surprise, given the closeness at the end of her life, that this was really, it didn't rupture the relationship, but I mean, severely damaged. I mean, that was, to tell family members and tell your mother, that's an unbelievably big hurdle. And you might tell us about that period, because who knows what she was going through having to hear it.
Yeah, my father had died, and then subsequently I married, and was with Eamon and had my kids, or had Aoife, and then went to the Guards. And if this was a time that people forget, there was never a hint of sexual abuse in newspapers, on the radio. It was not discussed. So it wasn't, something that my mother was aware of. And there was no clerical abuse even out at that stage. And then I told the Guards, and I knew it was something I would have to tell my mum. And a part of us never grows up. Like, to the day we die, to the day my mother died, I still wanted her to be my mum. And even though in the end we were looking after her, she was still my mum. And like, if she said Patricia, it was still Patricia. I wasn't Trish, like. And so to tell her, I was probably quite, maybe, I would suspect, knowing the girl I was in my 20s, I think I was probably quite abrasive. And I told her, I would say, without really having any idea that the impact it might have on her. I told her, thinking that, this would be something that she needed to know, and thinking that she would be devastated for me. But sure, she number one, had no idea what I was telling her about. She didn't understand, that sexual abuse was not, something, light. She thought, she had no idea the nature of it, and she couldn't get her head around the fact that the child she had reared and the past she had witnessed. I was telling her that no, that it wasn't like that, Mum. George Gibney abused me, and she didn't get it. And then I told her, and when I watched her face in front of me not getting it, I felt a tremendous rage, because I wanted her to just put out her arms and ask questions later. I just wanted her to hold me. And when she didn't get it, and she didn't, I think all my, kind of negativity around, I knew I wouldn't be believed, I knew this, I think that just shut me off. And I told her what abuse was, and I basically as good as threw it at her. And then I knew then that she was shutting it all down. And I got in ahead of her, and I said, and I've been to the guards. And that just threw her off course desperately, because I'd say in that moment she was thinking, she went to the guards, court case, publicity. In my head, I was thinking, I bet you she's worried about the neighbours.
Yes.
So I would suspect we had a very different reel going in our heads. And we literally just parted ways that day. And I came home and from Dublin and to Cork, and it was a very acrimonious goodbye. And then we didn't talk about it, which was just what to do.
It's just very Ireland 1990s.
Yeah, we didn't, and it was a big gap between us, and that went on for quite a few years. So I continued. I had 2 more children. I went up and down to Dublin. I stayed up for holidays. We chatted. We went on great, but beneath it all, it was all coinciding with that very difficult time in my 20s, and I didn't have a mum to say I was having nightmares or to share things with. Equally, she was in Dublin, still without her husband and partner, trying to get her head around it. And I would say looking for a way back, probably more than I was. But she just didn't have the words for it.
Yes. There was a Gay Byrne moment.
Yes. We were listening. I was down here in Cork, and I minded 2 other kids, so I had 4 smallies, and I was just on the radio was on, and Gay's usual show was on, and then an elderly man came on the show, and I just knew. I knew by Gay's voice, because he had that, kind of deferential, now we'll talk to this man, and I knew this was something. So kind of I was gone quiet, and then I heard the man, and he was talking about how he was abused as a child, as a small boy. And I think he was like 6 and 7. And he is now a man in his 70s. And he had never told a soul. And here he was telling Gay Byrne. And, it was one of those, anyone who's ever listened to the Gay Byrne show over the years, it was just one of those moments. But when I heard him, it was me I was listening to. I could hear him talking about me, and I could hear him talking about that little boy that was all alone. And he was this elderly man, but as you listened to him, all I could hear was the little boy, who was alone in a house. Not necessarily the abuse that he had that had happened to him, but just how he felt. And I just felt this need to ring my mum and tell her to listen to this man, and so I felt that she would understand me. And so I rang and I said, Mum, are you listening to the Gay Byrne show? And she said, yes, I'm listening. And I kind of just blurted it all out. I said, well, that's me, Mum. That's me every day. That's how I feel. That man is me. And I just remember there was this silence. My mum had this beautiful, gentle Donegal accent. And she just very gently went, I'm listening. And I knew she didn't mean she was listening to him. I knew what she said, and I hung up. And honestly, I think in the book I write something like the ice around my heart melted that day, and it melted very quickly. And I began to realize that it wasn't just Mum you know, I was keeping mum out. And that Gay Byrne that day, you know, really changed everything in my life. And I made an absolute choice that the following day, really, that, you know, right, I have to put this behind me. I can't, if I want mum in my life the way I want her, I can't carry on blaming her for that day in the kitchen when she didn't have the reaction I wanted her to have.
Yes.
And we had 17 glorious years after that, that we were so close. And she became like a Rottweiler, protecting me about abuse, and we had no problem discussing it. Now, not that we discussed it with each other, but you know, she had no problem if anyone outside the family said it to her, she wouldn't deny it, or she wouldn't be embarrassed by it, you know. So she was a huge support from then on. But imagine it might never have happened.
Yeah, it's you have these moments, I guess, with various members of your family. Your brother with the rose, I thought was just beautiful, and an undemonstrative Irish man. I can imagine him, and you meet him after, you know, the reality has hit everyone, and God, his reaction is beautiful.
Yeah. And we were just literally, you know, it was a very difficult time, and he'd come back from abroad, and I didn't know if he really knew everything, and I didn't know what way he felt about it all, because you know, Ben is a kind of he would be a quieter brother that way. My other brother Michael would be way more demonstrative and showy of his love and affection, and Ben is you know, much more solid and quiet that way. And so we went down, and I met him, and I was so on edge, wondering like what would he say. And sure, he didn't say anything. He just came up to me, and I had missed him arriving, and he just put out his arms and he just hugged me. And then, and like, I can remember his hug still to this day, standing there and just knowing, you know, as you just fold into a hug and just knowing, oh, he didn't need to speak. And yet then when I stood back, he had a rose, and he said, that's for you know, you, my beautiful sister. And like, but it didn't just say that, it said everything. And like, you know, I can remember just strength you get from small, you know, people don't have to you know, actively cure you. People just have to be there. You know, it's not the big things. It's the small things sometimes that have the huge healing effect on you. And you know, in his own way that day, Ben, you know, did put me back together.
Yeah. It was something I had wondered about, and it's in the book towards the end. So you as a parent, and it won't shock anyone to hear, your guard is up and you're a vigilant parent. The moment where, because schedules are clashing and kids are getting older and you can't be everywhere at once, eventually arrives, and daughter's music lesson has to happen for the first time without you in the room and her male teacher, and the walk out of the classroom and the getting into the car and putting on the seatbelt and trying to start the car and trying to drive out of that car park for obvious reasons. That's a battle.
Yeah, and it was, I suppose it was just a story to show that, you know, you do have to keep battling all through your life.
Yes.
To not let this beat you, you know. And like, that was my fourth child, so I'd managed to get through the other three without ever letting that happen, that my daughter would be at a music lesson or any such a thing without me there, or somebody I knew and trusted.
Yes.
But like, of course, I totally trusted the gentleman that she was with. He was just the most lovely man. And equally all the nice men in my life. It was just, this was my problem. And I had, you know, time had elapsed enough that I had, you know, kind of healed enough to be able, I don't think I would have been able to do that on my first or my second, you know, but I had come to the stage where now this was a problem. You know, I knew this was a problem for me, that I needed to get over this. And again, it's just that little competitiveness as well within me. You know, you didn't want him to beat you. Well, you're not letting her go to a music lesson for no reason. And, you know, that conversation I had to have with myself, and that honesty with myself, like, I could have made up a million excuses. Oh, you know, the time, too hard, the time. I knew the reason that I wasn't letting her go to that lesson was because I didn't want her on her own with him. And so, I did let her go, but it was very, very difficult. And I suppose the thing about that story within the book is also to show that I did all of that without telling a soul in the family. And in fact, writing the book before they even knew about that day, and they're little stories that happen in your day that you don't know. I remember one of my friends said that she actually remembers me saying that, she went, that's her first time actually going on her own. And she actually remembers me saying it and not realizing,
Yes.
oh my God,
The
I
weight.
didn't know
Yeah.
that it took the entire day for you to get over it.
I guess how could anyone know? Yeah. What has struck Eamon or people in your family about the book?
I think Eamon put it very well when the podcast came out first and he listened to it. And the book was being written at the time. And he listened to the first episode of the podcast. So Gary speaks about me, but people don't know it's me. And the podcast came out week by week at the time. And when Eamon heard that one, he said immediate reaction was two things. He was a blind panic. He thought, I'm not able for this. I don't, next week I won't be able for it because I knew I was in it. And also he said that his immediate reaction was, please don't write the book. Not because he didn't want me to write the book, but he didn't know how he would cope with it. And then when he did listen to the podcast and my story of it, and it did upset, of course it upset, and my family and my friends. But then he said, and I think he put it very well, he said, I knew it had happened to you, but I never really knew what it was. And the podcast, alludes to a lot of it, and it's my voice, so it's what got people. But equally, the book, my friends were going, they weren't prepared for the podcast, but then they said the book was, even the words were so different, because I had said to them, but I've told you over the years you knew this, and they were saying, no, when it's written down and the stories. And one even said, like, even she's nervous now that he's inside her head. She thinks of me when a car slows down behind me. So I think that was it. Family, I think it made them very sad. I think the book was the hardest thing. I really, really struggled sending it to family, just knowing, here you go, here we are in a pandemic, here's some cheery reading for you. That was, when you're going to make them sad, it doesn't matter that they know I'm really well and that I'm really happy. And, as I said to them, look, the reason I'm like this is because you showered me with love, and 108 was a beautiful place, and it minded me, and you all looked after me. You just didn't know it. It made them sad, and it hurt them on my behalf.
I'm sure.
But you're now, like, they're fierce proud, and they're just so supportive, and they're so, they're kind of they're I just know they're all there beside me all the time.
It's just been such a privilege to hear you talk about it, and so brilliantly as well. I know the obligatory question you get asked is how you feel about Gibney skiving off to Florida. Where are you on that? Like, in other ways now, he's more publicly shamed than ever, and yet obviously he hasn't served his crime. But I mean, do you think? I wonder, did he ever listen to the podcast? I wonder, does he realize what his name is synonymous with in a huge way for a whole new generation now, in a way it mightn't have been if he'd just been given a few years in prison and released. It's hard to know. Where are you and all that?
Yeah, I suppose for me, I love that he lives far away. I love that he doesn't live in Ireland. I've said that before. I love that he doesn't share my sky. I love that when I will go up to Dublin, there's not a sniff of him. I will, even if I think I see him down the road, and that's part of flashbacks, that you do have imaginings that, you put his face on somebody else's, or you hear a voice and you go, who's that? I'm very healed because I'm never ever have to say, I'm convinced I saw him the last day. I know I didn't. So that was very healing. I mean, of course, I raged for years that he got away with it. And I think I would have raged more if Johnny hadn't allowed us, tell
Yes.
our stories. I'm very comfortable now with it, because I really don't believe that any amount of years would ever have sufficed for me
Yes.
personally or for any of his survivors. I do understand that people equate justice with prison, and I do believe that for some it's been a very, very hard knock that he was never imprisoned for anything he did to them. And I
So
think people coming
fellow survivors you've talked to still struggle with that.
well, I know, some of my fellow survivors would be are very much of my own frame of mind, that
Okay.
we didn't get our day in court, but that, there's all different kinds of justice, and they're very I would speak regularly with Burr now, and she would be probably the one I would the only one that I would profess to be able to quote, really.
Yeah.
And we do have very similar outlook on it that way. I rarely actually think of George Gibney or his life or what he's doing, because it doesn't equate with my life. My life is more important than his life in my world. And I live a great life. He lost a wonderful family. He lost everything in this, and I don't mean lost it in a bad way. He, that's what he gave up. By being the monster he was, that was taken away from him, and he can stay over there. Don't. I'm quite happy him not to come back. But I honestly, and I've said it many, many times, I would be, there on the court steps with everyone else that needs justice if ever Gibney was brought back for justice. Yes. Because I think everyone, has to come up with their own sense of what will heal them, and if prison is what they need, I back them all the way.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. What a lovely thing, by the way, you got back into a pool.
Yeah. That was again, and I say this so often, all the milestones that were the most difficult were probably the most rewarding in the end. Battling to let my daughter swim. That was at the pool where, I had lost Gary actually at that pool here in Cork as a 15-year-old, and now it's just, so local to me.
I know.
And
even in the book, even in the book where you describe going in and the smell of chlorine and all these triggering things, I can't imagine, but yeah, you document. I get a glimpse of it.
Yeah, and I think what was lovely is that to actually come to terms with the fact that swimming was wonderful, and swimming is wonderful, and it's a magnificent sport, and it continues to be a wonderful sport, and I got heavily involved in it, and there's hundreds, I would say, of children now in Cork City have been taught to swim by me. And and have learned to love it, and hopefully maybe in 20-30 years time, and they're master swimmers or their kids are swimming. That all came from me deciding to go back swimming, and became a positive experience. So yeah, it was lovely. That Gibney, there's so many things he could have, so much more he could have taken from life that I haven't allowed him to take. And that I have been very lucky that I've been enabled by people around me and helped me to make all those big milestone steps that I have made.
Listen, it's been amazing to talk to you. And again, the book, I'll hold it up here for anyone who's watching us on our various social channels, Above Water by Trish Kearney. I couldn't recommend it highly enough. It really is brilliant. And I'm sure lots of you listened to the podcast as well and heard Trish's story there. So, yeah, listen, it's been great talking to you. Do you have many more of these lined up? Or are you taking a break now?
Oh yeah, there's a few coming now and again, but I've a book festival now where I'm coming up with Gareth O'Callaghan's new book and myself and PJ Coogan, and I'm looking forward to that. But life is settling down, and I still have to make the dinner every day, which my kids don't care.
Listen, such a pleasure. Thanks so much, Trish, and all the best for the future. Thank you.
And listen, thanks a million for the opportunity. Take care.